Maeve Sullivan clutched her worn leather suitcase tightly against her chest as the stagecoach rattled down the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Colorado. The year was 1878, and after traveling over 2,000 miles from Boston, her journey was nearly complete, or so she thought. The butterflies in her stomach had transformed into angry hornets as the coach slowed to a stop in front of the town's only hotel. "Last stop, Promise Creek," called the driver from above. Maeve took a deep breath and adjusted her bonnet, which had gone slightly askew during the bumpy final stretch of their journey. As the only remaining passenger, she felt the driver's impatience as he opened the door and extended his hand to help her descend. "Thank you kindly," she murmured. Accepting his assistance, her feet had barely touched the ground when a short, balding man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose approached her. His face wore an expression that made her heart sink immediately. "Miss Sullivan?" he inquired, his voice clipped and businesslike. "Yes, sir. I am Maeve Sullivan." She attempted a smile despite her growing unease. "I am Harold Winters, attorney for Mr. Edward Chamberlain." He looked her up and down with unconcealed disapproval. "I regret to inform you that there has been a misunderstanding." Maeve's smile faltered. "I do not understand, sir. I have all the correspondence right here." She fumbled with her reticule to retrieve the letters. "That won't be necessary, Miss Sullivan." Mr. Winters cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Chamberlain was expecting someone of a different stature. He finds that you are not suitable as his bride and has instructed me to provide you with return fare to Boston." He extended an envelope toward her. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Maeve stared at the envelope but made no move to take it. People on the boardwalk had stopped to watch the exchange, and her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Not suitable," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Winters lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent nearby onlookers from hearing. "You are considerably larger than Mr. Chamberlain anticipated. He requires a wife of more delicate proportions." Tears stung her eyes as the full meaning of his words struck her. She had been rejected, sent back because of her size. The curves she had inherited from her Irish mother, the strong arms and sturdy frame that had served her well during long hours of caring for her ailing father, were now deemed unsuitable for marriage. "I see," she managed to say, her throat constricting painfully. "The stage leaves tomorrow morning. I've arranged accommodation for you at the hotel for tonight." Mr. Winters pressed the envelope into her hand and tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Sullivan." As he walked away, Maeve remained rooted to the spot, too stunned to move. The stagecoach driver had already unloaded her trunk onto the boardwalk and was preparing to depart. The curious gazes of townspeople burned into her skin. "Well, I'll be damned," came a deep voice from behind her. "Winters, you miserable excuse for a human being, get back here." Maeve turned to see a tall man striding toward them. His broad-shouldered frame was clothed in a faded blue shirt and worn denim trousers. A cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could see the tight line of his jaw and the flash of anger in his eyes. "Reid," Mr. Winters seemed surprised. "This does not concern you." "The hell it doesn't." The man Reid reached them in a few long strides. "You're standing in the middle of the street humiliating a lady who's traveled halfway across the country, and you think that doesn't concern decent folk." Harold Winters adjusted his spectacles nervously. Mr. Chamberlain's instructions were quite clear. "Then Mr. Chamberlain can go to the devil," Reid interrupted. He turned to Maeve, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with lines around his eyes suggesting both laughter and hardship. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin. "Madam, I'm Reid McAlister. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." His voice had softened considerably. "And if you don't mind me saying so, Chamberlain's a fool." Maeve blinked away tears, unsure how to respond to this unexpected intervention. Reid turned back to the attorney. "Give me that return fare." "I beg your pardon, you heard me. Hand it over." "If the lady decides to return east, I'll see she gets it. But she deserves time to consider her options without being rushed onto tomorrow's stage like unwanted freight." Mr. Winters hesitated, then shrugged. "As you wish, McAlister. The money is in the envelope I gave her." He tipped his hat again. "Miss Sullivan, I wish you good fortune, wherever you may find yourself." With that, he hurried away. Reid turned back to Maeve. "I apologize for the welcome you've received, Miss Sullivan. Promise Creek is usually more hospitable than this." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. McAlister, but her voice broke, and she struggled to maintain her composure. "Let's get you settled at the hotel," he said gently. "Then, if you're willing, I'd like to talk with you about an alternative to that eastbound stage." Before she could ask what he meant, Reid had picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and was gesturing for her to follow him to the hotel entrance. Maeve hesitated only briefly before following. What choice did she have? She was 24 years old, alone in a strange town, with nothing to return to in Boston except an empty apartment and mounting debts from her father's funeral expenses. The money in the envelope would cover her return journey, but what awaited her there? She had sold most of their possessions to pay for her passage west. The hotel lobby was mercifully cool after the heat of the afternoon sun. The proprietress, a stout woman with kind eyes, looked up as they entered. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bennet," Reid greeted her. "This is Miss Sullivan. She'll need a room for at least a few days." Mrs. Bennet's eyes darted between them curiously, but she simply nodded and turned to retrieve a key from the wall behind her. "Room 3, upstairs on the right. Would you like some tea sent up, dear? You look like you've had a long journey." "That would be most appreciated, thank you," Maeve replied, trying to gather her dignity around her like a cloak. Reid carried her trunk upstairs and set it down in a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "Miss Sullivan," he said, standing awkwardly by the door, "I know this is forward of me, but I'd like to speak with you once you've had a chance to rest, perhaps over supper. The hotel dining room serves a decent meal." Maeve studied him warily. Why was this stranger being so kind? "Mr. McAlister, while I appreciate your assistance, I must ask what your interest is in my situation." A slight smile curved his lips. "Let's just say I have no patience for men like Chamberlain, and I might have a proposition that could benefit us both." He placed his hat back on his head. 7 o'clock in the dining room. You can hear what I have to say, and if it doesn't suit you, no harm done." After a moment's consideration, Maeve nodded. "Very well, Mr. McAlister. 7 o'clock." As soon as he left, Maeve sank onto the bed, her legs finally giving way beneath her. The humiliation of being rejected sight unseen, or rather, sighs unseen, washed over her anew. Her hands trembled as she unpinned her bonnet and removed her traveling jacket. What kind of proposition could this rancher possibly have for her? And should she trust him? Yet something in his straightforward manner, and the indignation he'd shown on her behalf, suggested he might be that rarest of creatures. A genuinely good man. The tea arrived, brought by a young girl who bobbed a curtsy and disappeared without a word. Maeve poured herself a cup and stood by the window, watching the activity in the street below as she considered her limited options. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Maeve had washed away the dust of travel, changed into her second-best dress, a dark green cotton that complemented her auburn hair, and steeled herself for whatever proposition awaited her. Reid McAlister was already seated at a corner table when she entered the dining room. He rose immediately, and Maeve couldn't help noticing that several female diners watched him appreciatively. With his freshly washed hair and clean shirt, he cut an imposing figure. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "You look rested." "Thank you, Mr. McAlister." She sat down, arranging her skirts carefully. "I must admit, I'm curious about this proposition of yours." He waited until after they had ordered before leaning forward slightly. "Miss Sullivan, I'm going to be direct with you. I've been looking for a wife." Maeve nearly choked on her water. "Mr. McAlister, please hear me out," he said, raising a hand. "I own a successful cattle ranch, I've built a good house, and I can provide a comfortable life. But ranching is hard work, and I need a partner, not just a pretty ornament to keep house." Maeve studied him, unsure whether to be offended or intrigued. "And you believe I might be suitable for this role because?" "Because Chamberlain's rejection tells me something about you," Reid said quietly. "It tells me you're a woman of substance. I don't mean just physically, though there's nothing wrong with how the good Lord made you. I mean you're likely practical, sturdy, capable, the kind of woman who could handle frontier life." Despite herself, Maeve felt a blush creep into her cheeks. No one had ever spoken of her in such terms, as if her size were an asset rather than a liability. "You know nothing about me, Mr. McAlister. I know you came west as a mail-order bride, which takes courage. I know you held your head high today despite Chamberlain's cruelty, which shows character." He paused as their food arrived. "And I know my offer isn't romantic, but it's honest." Maeve picked up her fork, considering his words. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. McAlister?" "Marriage to a complete stranger." "No, not yet," he replied, surprising her. "I'm proposing you come to my ranch for 1 month. As my housekeeper," he added quickly. "You'll have your own room, complete privacy, and I'll pay you fair wages. You'll see how the ranch operates, and we'll get to know each other. After a month, if you wish to return east, I'll personally ensure you get on that stage with your return fare intact. And if I don't wish to return east, then we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Either as my housekeeper or as my wife." Maeve set down her fork. "This is highly irregular, Mr. McAlister." "Indeed it is," he agreed with a small smile. "But then, so is being sent back east for being too big." Despite everything, Maeve found herself returning his smile. "You make a fair point." They ate in silence for a few moments before she spoke again. "Tell me about your ranch." Reid's face lit up. 500 acres of the prettiest land in Colorado. I run about 300 head of cattle, have 8 good horses, and a house I built myself. It's not fancy, but it's solid 4 bedrooms, a good kitchen, even glass windows shipped all the way from St. Louis. His pride was evident in every word. "And you manage this alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands who help with the cattle. Good men, Hector Mendoza and Charlie Two Trees. They have their own cabin near the corral." He took a sip of coffee. "But the house has been empty except for me since my mother passed 3 years ago." Maeve considered this information. "Why haven't you found a local woman to marry? Surely there must be eligible ladies in Promise Creek." Reid's expression grew more serious. "Most of the single women around here are looking for merchants or bankers' men who work indoors and come home clean every night. Ranching is hard, dusty work." He shrugged. "And perhaps I've been too busy building something worth offering to a wife." There was something refreshingly honest about him. No flowery compliments or false promises, just a straightforward assessment of what he needed and what he could provide. "What would my duties entail?" "As your housekeeper, I mean. Cooking, cleaning, mending, the usual household tasks. Nothing you wouldn't expect." He hesitated. "And getting to know the ranch. Learning if it's a place you could call home. The proposition was tempting. A month's reprieve to consider her future, with honest work and fair pay in the meantime. And perhaps something more if they suited each other. I should tell you, Mr. McAlister, that while I can cook plain food adequately, I'm not particularly skilled in the kitchen. My father and I lived modestly in Boston after my mother died. I worked as a seamstress and occasionally as a nurse. Reid nodded. Sewing skills are valuable on a ranch, and knowing nursing might come in handy too. As for cooking, his eyes crinkled at the corners. I've been feeding myself for 3 years. Anything you make would likely be an improvement. Maeve found herself warming to him despite her reservations. And what if, after a month, we find we don't suit? Then we part as friends. I'll see you safely onto the stage with your wages and the return fare Chamberlain provided. He met her gaze directly. No hard feelings, no obligations. She took a deep breath. When would you expect me to start? I'm heading back to the ranch tomorrow. You could come with me then, or take a few days to rest if you prefer. Tomorrow would be fine, she decided. What was the point in delaying? Every day spent at the hotel would deplete her limited funds. Reid's smile was genuine. I'm glad to hear it, Miss Sullivan. Please call me Maeve. Maeve, he repeated as if testing the name. It suits you. And I'm Reid. They finished their meal discussing practical matters, what belongings she should bring, how long the journey to the ranch would take, what she might expect upon arrival. By the time they parted in the hotel lobby, Maeve felt a cautious optimism replacing the despair that had gripped her earlier. I'll come for you at 9 tomorrow morning, Reid said, hat in hand. We'll stop at the general store for any supplies you might need before heading to the ranch. Thank you, Reid, she said, extending her hand. For your kindness today. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Rest well, Maeve. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Maeve wondered if she was being foolish. She knew nothing about this man beyond what he had told her. Yet something in her heart told her to trust him to give this unexpected opportunity a chance. In her room, she opened her trunk and began sorting through her belongings, preparing for yet another journey. But this time, instead of traveling toward a man who had already rejected her, she would be accompanying one who had looked at her, truly looked at her, and declared, in not so many words, that she was perfect just as she was. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of Maeve's hotel room. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with stagecoaches that never reached their destination and faceless men who turned away from her. Rising early, she washed and dressed with care, selecting a practical navy blue traveling dress and pinning her thick auburn hair into a simple but neat arrangement. Her trunk was packed, except for the few items she would need before departing. As she sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the breakfast hour to begin, doubt crept in once more. Was she being reckless, agreeing to live on a remote ranch with a man she had just met? What did she really know about Reid McAlister? A knock at her door startled her from these thoughts. Miss Sullivan. It was Mrs. Bennet, the hotel proprietress. I've brought you some coffee, dear. May I come in? Of course, Maeve called, rising to open the door. Mrs. Bennet entered with a small tray bearing coffee and fresh biscuits. I thought you might appreciate this before heading downstairs. She set the tray on the small table by the window. I understand you'll be going out to the McAlister ranch today. News traveled fast in Promise Creek, apparently. Yes, Mr. McAlister has hired me as his housekeeper, Maeve explained, emphasizing the nature of the arrangement. Mrs. Bennet nodded, her expression knowing. Reid McAlister is a good man, Miss Sullivan, one of the best in these parts. His father was one of the first settlers in this valley, and Reid has worked hard to build on what his pa started. She poured coffee for both of them. When his mother took ill, Reid nursed her himself for nearly 2 years before she passed. Never complained once, though running the ranch and caring for an invalid must have been exhausting. Maeve accepted the coffee gratefully. You know him well, then. This is a small community, dear. Everyone knows everyone. Mrs. Bennet settled her ample frame into the room's only chair. There's been more than one young lady from hereabouts who set her cap for Reid, but he's always been too busy with that ranch of his to pay much attention. This information aligned with what Reid had told Maeve the previous evening, which was somewhat reassuring. I confess I'm a bit nervous, Maeve admitted. I've never lived outside of Boston before. Mrs. Bennet patted her hand. The West takes some getting used to, that's certain, but there's opportunity here for those willing to work hard. She gave Maeve an appraising look. You seem like that sort to me. Strong, practical, not some delicate flower who'll wilt at the first sign of difficulty. There it was again, that suggestion that her sturdy build was an advantage rather than a flaw. It was a novel perspective for Maeve, who had grown up hearing her mother warn her not to eat too much lest she become unmarriageable. Thank you for the coffee and your kindness, Mrs. Bennet, Maeve said sincerely. You're welcome, dear. And remember, Mrs. Bennet lowered her voice conspiratorially. If things don't work out at the ranch for any reason, you come right back here. I can always use help with the hotel. After Mrs. Bennet departed, Maeve felt marginally more confident about her decision. Having a potential backup plan eased some of her anxiety. She finished her coffee, gathered her reticule, and headed downstairs for a proper breakfast. The dining room was nearly empty at this early hour. Maeve had just finished her meal when she heard the hotel's front door open and heavy footsteps cross the lobby. A moment later, Reid appeared in the doorway, scanning the room until his gaze landed on her. Good morning, he said, approaching her table. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though his shirt was a faded red today instead of blue. You're up early. I wanted to be ready, she replied, noting that he seemed even taller this morning, his shoulders broader in the sunlight streaming through the windows. We have time for me to get some breakfast before we head to the store, if you don't mind waiting. Not at all. While Reid ate, they discussed the journey ahead. The ranch was about 2 hours' drive by wagon, he explained, over relatively flat terrain until the final approach. The house sits on a rise overlooking the valley, he told her between bites of ham and eggs. My grandfather chose the spot because it catches the breeze in summer and is sheltered from the worst of the winter winds. Maeve tried to picture it. Does it get very cold in winter? Cold enough. We get snow from November through March, sometimes into April. He smiled slightly. But the house is snug, and we keep plenty of firewood stacked. After breakfast, they settled Maeve's bill, and Reid loaded her trunk into his wagon while she said goodbye to Mrs. Bennet. Then they made their way to Miller's General Store, a large establishment that seemed to stock everything from harnesses to hairpins. Good morning, Reid, called the proprietor, a thin man with impressive mustaches. Heard you're taking on a housekeeper. News travels fast, Reid muttered to Maeve before replying more loudly. That's right, George. This is Miss Sullivan. She'll be needing some supplies. George Miller hurried over to shake Maeve's hand. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Sullivan. Whatever you need, we've got it or can order it. For the next hour, Maeve selected household items she thought might be useful fabric for curtains and tablecloths, some basic cooking spices, a few personal items she hadn't been able to bring from Boston. Reid added several items to their purchases, including 2 heavy wool blankets and a set of sturdy crockery. House is a bit bare, he explained when he caught her questioning look. Ma's things. Well, after she passed, I couldn't bear to look at them for a while. By the time I was ready, moths had gotten into the linens, and most of the crockery had cracked from the temperature changes. Maeve nodded, understanding. Grief made people do strange things, like leaving rooms untouched or clearing away all evidence of the departed. Her own father's death had left her numb for weeks. As Reid settled their account, Maeve noticed a woman watching them from near the fabric counter. She was slender and fashionably dressed, with blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken considerable effort. When she caught Maeve's eye, she approached with a determined stride. "You must be Edward Chamberlain's mail-order bride," she said without preamble, her voice carrying clearly through the store. "I'm Rebecca Hargrove." Maeve felt her face grow warm but kept her composure. "Maeve Sullivan," she replied simply. "I heard what happened yesterday," Rebecca continued, her gaze sweeping over Maeve assessingly. "Such a shame when expectations don't align with reality." Before Maeve could respond to this thinly veiled insult, Reid appeared at her side. "Miss Hargrove," he said, his tone cooler than Maeve had yet heard from him. "I see you're making Miss Sullivan's acquaintance." "Indeed," Rebecca smiled up at him. "I was just expressing my sympathy for her situation." "How thoughtful," Reid replied dryly. "But as Miss Sullivan has accepted a position at my ranch, I'd say her situation is quite favorable." Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. "As your housekeeper, how practical of you both." "Miss Sullivan's practicality is one of her many admirable qualities," Reid said, offering Maeve his arm. "If you'll excuse us, we should get on the road before the day grows any warmer." As they exited the store, Maeve could feel Rebecca Hargrove's gaze boring into her back. Once outside, she couldn't help asking, "I take it Miss Hargrove is one of those local ladies who set her cap for you?" Reid's lips twitched. "Rebecca's father owns the bank. She's been looking to upgrade her situation from banker's daughter to rancher's wife for about a year now." He helped Maeve into the wagon. "Unfortunately for her, I require more from a partner than a pretty face and fashionable dresses." The journey to the ranch took them out of town along a well-traveled road that gradually gave way to a narrower track. The landscape opened up around them, vast expanses of prairie grass interspersed with copses of trees, with mountains rising blue in the distance. It was unlike anything Maeve had seen before, the sheer scale of it both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. "It's so open," she remarked, shading her eyes against the sun. "That bothers some people," Reid acknowledged. "Makes them feel exposed, but I've always found it freeing." He pointed to their left, where a creek wound its way through the grassland. "That's Promise Creek. It runs through my property and provides water for the cattle." As they traveled, Reid pointed out landmarks and shared snippets of local history. Maeve learned about the indigenous peoples who had first inhabited the valley, the early settlers who had established ranches, and the more recent arrivals drawn by rumors of gold and silver in the mountains. "My father came for the gold rush but stayed for the land," Reid explained. He was smart enough to realize that feeding miners was more reliable than finding gold himself. Eventually, they turned onto an even narrower track marked by 2 wooden posts. "McAlister land starts here," Reid said with evident pride. "We'll see the house soon." Around a bend, the landscape opened up to reveal a broad valley with a creek running through it. Cattle dotted the grassland, and in the distance, Maeve could see several horses in a corral near a cluster of buildings. On a gentle rise overlooking it all stood a 2-story house built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. "That's home," Reid said softly. As they drew closer, Maeve could see that the house was indeed substantial, with glass windows as Reid had mentioned and a stone chimney rising from the roof. It wasn't as grand as some of the Boston homes she had visited, but it had a solid, welcoming presence that appealed to her. Two men emerged from a nearby barn as the wagon approached, one tall and lean with dark hair and features suggesting Mexican heritage. The other shorter and stockier with the distinctive coppery skin and high cheekbones of a Native American. "That's Hector and Charlie," Reid explained. "My ranch hands. Good men, both of them." The men waited respectfully as Reid brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house. He jumped down and came around to help Maeve descend. "Miss Sullivan, meet Hector Mendoza and Charlie Two Trees. Gentlemen, this is Miss Maeve Sullivan. She'll be keeping house for us." Both men removed their hats. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Sullivan," Hector said with a slight accent. Charlie simply nodded, his dark eyes assessing her thoughtfully. "The pleasure is mine," Maeve replied. "I look forward to working with you both." "Would you mind unloading the supplies and bringing Miss Sullivan's trunk inside?" Reid asked them. "I'd like to show her the house." As the men set to work, Reid guided Maeve up the steps to the porch. "It's not fancy," he warned, opening the front door, "but it's solid and weather-tight." They stepped into a large central room with a stone fireplace at one end. Simple but well-made furniture was arranged around the hearth: a sofa, two armchairs, a low table. The floors were wide wooden planks, worn smooth by years of use. Windows on 3 walls let in plenty of light. "This is the main living area," Reid explained, somewhat unnecessarily. "Through there is the kitchen." He pointed to a doorway leading to a spacious room with a large cast iron stove, a work table, and open shelving holding a modest collection of pots, pans, and dishes. "It's a good kitchen," Maeve observed, running her hand along the smooth work table. "Plenty of space." Reid seemed pleased by her approval. "The pantry is through there," he indicated another door, "and there's a root cellar below for keeping things cool." He led her back through the main room to a hallway. "There are 2 bedrooms downstairs and 2 upstairs. I thought you might prefer one of the upstairs rooms. They get better light, and you'd have more privacy." They climbed the stairs to find a landing with doors opening off either side. Reid showed her the first bedroom, which was spacious with a large window overlooking the valley. "This was my parents' room," he said. "I use the other one, but you're welcome to take this one if you prefer it." Maeve stepped inside, noting the heavy wooden bed frame with a bare mattress, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. Like the rest of the house, it was simple but well constructed. "This will be perfect," she said, drawn to the view from the window. "The light is wonderful." Reid seemed to relax slightly. "Good. There are fresh linens in the chest there, and I'll have the men bring up your trunk." He hesitated in the doorway. "I'll leave you to get settled. When you're ready, come down to the kitchen. I'll show you where everything is stored." Alone in the room that would be hers for at least the next month, Maeve took a deep breath. The house smelled of wood and leather and faintly of coffee, not unpleasant, but definitely masculine. It clearly needed a woman's touch, with its bare windows and utilitarian furnishings. Hector brought up her trunk, setting it carefully at the foot of the bed. "If you need anything, Miss Sullivan, just ask," he said with a gentle smile before retreating. Maeve unpacked her clothing into the chest of drawers, then made the bed with fresh linens from the chest Reid had indicated. She placed her mother's silver-backed hairbrush on the washstand and her Bible on the bedside table. Small touches, but they made the room feel more like hers. As she worked, she contemplated the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been journeying to meet a man who had rejected her sight unseen. Now she was settling into the home of a man who had looked at her, truly looked at her, and decided she might be exactly what he needed. It was far too soon to know if Reid McAlister was the answer to her prayers, or merely a temporary respite from disaster. But as Maeve gazed out at the vast, beautiful landscape that surrounded his home, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. Downstairs, she found Reid in the kitchen brewing coffee on the stove. He looked up as she entered, his expression warming. "Settled in?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She gestured around the kitchen. "Where would you like me to start?" "Coffee first," he insisted, pouring 2 cups and gesturing for her to sit at the kitchen table. "There's no rush, Maeve. Take today to get your bearings. Tomorrow's soon enough to start tackling the house." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Tell me about your daily routine. What time do you rise? When do you take meals?" "I'm up before dawn most days," Reid said, leaning against the counter. "Breakfast at first light, then out with the herd or working the land until midday. Dinner, that's what we call the noon meal here, is usually something quick. Then back to work until dusk with supper after." Maeve nodded, mentally planning how she would organize her days. "And what sorts of meals do you prefer?" Reid's laugh was unexpected and rich. "Honestly, anything that isn't burnt. I'm not particular, Maeve. After 3 years of my own cooking, anything you make will seem like a feast." The warmth in his voice made something flutter in her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was a business arrangement, at least for now. She needed to focus on being an excellent housekeeper, not on the way Reid's eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Well then," she said briskly, "perhaps you could show me what supplies we have on hand and what I might need to request for future meals." Reid showed her the pantry, which was reasonably well stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and preserved goods. The root cellar below held potatoes, onions, and apples that were starting to wrinkle with age. "We butchered a steer last month, so there's plenty of beef," Reid explained. "It's smoked or salted, stored in the smokehouse out back. And there's a chicken coop, though the hens haven't been laying well lately. Probably need more attention than I've been giving them." "I can look after them," Maeve offered. "I've never kept chickens before, but I'm willing to learn." Reid's approving nod warmed her more than it should have. "There's a kitchen garden too, though it's mostly weeds now. My mother used to grow vegetables and herbs there." After the tour of the kitchen and storage areas, Reid showed her the rest of the property: the barn, the corrals, the bunkhouse where Hector and Charlie lived, the smokehouse, and the chicken coop. The latter was indeed in need of attention, with only 3 scrawny hens pecking listlessly at the dusty ground. "Poor things," Maeve murmured, entering the coop carefully. The hens regarded her warily but didn't flee. "They need regular feeding and fresh water, and this coop needs a good cleaning." "I know," Reid admitted, looking chagrined. "They were my mother's project. After she passed, I just couldn't seem to find the time." Maeve noted the flash of pain that crossed his face when he mentioned his mother. "I'll tend to them tomorrow," she promised. "Perhaps with proper care they'll start laying again." They were returning to the house when Charlie approached, leading a beautiful chestnut mare. "Thought Miss Sullivan might like to meet Penny," he said, his voice deep and melodious. "Gentlest horse on the ranch." "She's beautiful," Maeve said, admiring the mare's gleaming coat. "Do you ride, Maeve?" Reid asked. "I've never had the opportunity," she admitted. "In Boston, only the wealthy keep horses for pleasure riding." Charlie patted the mare's neck. "Penny could teach you. She's patient with beginners." Reid nodded. "It would be useful for you to learn. The ranch is large, and sometimes walking isn't practical." Maeve approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand as Charlie demonstrated. The mare snuffled at her palm and then gently butted her head against Maeve's shoulder. "She likes you," Charlie said with a rare smile. "I can give you lessons when you're ready." "Thank you, Charlie. I'd like that very much." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Maeve familiarized herself with the house and began making mental lists of what needed to be done. Reid left her to explore while he and the men tended to ranch work, returning at dusk with a saddle bag containing a freshly caught trout. "Thought you might appreciate not having to cook tonight," he said, holding up his prize. "I know where to catch the best fish in the creek." While Reid cleaned the fish outside, Maeve found potatoes and some withered carrots in the root cellar, which she peeled and set to boil. She discovered a crock of sourdough starter in the pantry that still seemed viable and managed to mix up a batch of biscuits to bake while the fish cooked. The meal was simple but satisfying. Reid seemed genuinely impressed by the biscuits, slathering them with butter and honey. "These are delicious," he said, reaching for a third. "I haven't had fresh bread in months." "The starter is good," Maeve acknowledged. "I was surprised it was still active. My mother always kept it going. I've tried to maintain it, but—" he shrugged. "Cooking's never been my strong suit." They ate in companionable silence for a while before Reid asked, "Will you tell me about Boston? I've never been east of the Mississippi." Maeve described her life there, the narrow streets and crowded tenements of the North End where she and her father had lived. The grand houses of Beacon Hill where she had sometimes delivered finished sewing. The bustle of the harbor with ships arriving from all over the world. "It sounds very different from here," Reid observed. "It is," she agreed. "Noisy, crowded, always moving. But it had its charms: 2 concerts in the park, libraries full of books, shops with goods from every corner of the earth. Do you miss it?" His question was gentle, his eyes searching her face. Maeve considered carefully before answering. "I miss certain aspects, but Boston held little for me after my father died, and I've always wanted to see more of the world." She gestured toward the window, where the last light of day was fading over the mountains. "This is certainly different from anything I've known before." "It grows on you," Reid said quietly. "The space, the silence, the way the land changes with the seasons." After supper, Reid insisted on washing the dishes while Maeve dried them. It was a domestic scene that felt strangely comfortable, as if they had done this together many times before. "I usually sit on the porch for a while in the evenings," Reid said as they finished. "Would you care to join me?" The porch faced west, offering a view of the sunset's afterglow painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. They sat in rocking chairs, listening to the chorus of crickets and the occasional distant lowing of cattle. "It's so peaceful," Maeve murmured, letting the gentle motion of the rocker soothe her tired body. "This is my favorite time of day," Reid admitted, "when the work is done and the land settles into night." They rocked in companionable silence until the stars began to appear. Maeve had never seen so many stars in Boston. The city lights and coal smoke obscured all but the brightest. "The sky is amazing," she breathed, tilting her head back to take in the glittering expanse. "One of the benefits of being far from civilization," Reid agreed. "My father used to tell me that each star was the soul of an ancestor watching over us." "What a lovely thought." Maeve was quiet for a moment, then added, "My mother used to say that when good people die, God hangs a new star in the sky to light their way to heaven." Reid glanced at her. "You lost your mother young." "I was 16. Consumption." The pain had dulled over the years but never truly disappeared. "My father followed her this past winter, his heart." "I'm sorry," Reid said simply. "Losing parents is hard no matter how old you are." His understanding was a balm. They sat in silence for a while longer before Reid stood and offered his hand. "It's getting late and you've had a long day. I'll light you up to your room." He escorted her upstairs with a lamp and bid her good night at her door. "Sleep well, Maeve. Tomorrow is a new day." Alone in her room, Maeve changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, gazing at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her cheeks were flushed from the sun, and perhaps from something else, the strange, unexpected warmth that Reid's presence seemed to kindle in her. "This is a business arrangement," she reminded her reflection sternly. "Nothing more." But as she slipped between the clean sheets of her new bed, she couldn't help but wonder if it might become something more. Reid McAlister was unlike any man she had ever known, straightforward, hardworking, and seemingly unconcerned with the superficial qualities that had led Edward Chamberlain to reject her. Could she build a life here in this vast, wild place? It was far too soon to tell. But as sleep claimed her, Maeve realized that for the first time since her father's death, she was looking forward to the dawn. The next few days established a rhythm to life at the McAlister ranch. Maeve rose before dawn to start the coffee and prepare breakfast for Reid and his ranch hands. The men would eat quickly, grateful for the hot food, before heading out to their day's work. Once they departed, Maeve tackled the house with determined energy. Years of bachelor living had left their mark. Dust had settled into every crevice. Cobwebs adorned the corners, and the windows were clouded with grime. She started in the kitchen, scrubbing every surface until the work tables gleamed and reorganizing the pantry to make cooking more efficient. Each day, she ventured further in her cleaning campaign. By the end of her first week, the entire downstairs sparkled, and she had hung simple curtains made from fabric purchased at Miller's General Store. Reid noticed the changes immediately. "The place hasn't looked this good since my mother was alive," he remarked one evening, his gaze taking in the polished floors and clean windows. "There's still much to do," Maeve replied, though she was pleased by his appreciation. "The upstairs needs attention, and I've barely started on the linens." "Don't work too hard," Reid cautioned. "This isn't a race, Maeve. You have time." Outside the house, Maeve devoted her attention to the chicken coop and the overgrown kitchen garden. She cleaned the coop thoroughly, ensuring the hens had fresh water and regular feeding. Within days, they seemed more energetic, and by the end of the week, she found 2 small eggs nestled in the straw. The kitchen garden proved more challenging. Years of neglect had allowed weeds to choke out most of the vegetables, though she discovered hardy herbs still struggling along the borders: rosemary, thyme, and mint, that had survived despite inattention. Hector, seeing her struggling with the tough prairie grass that had invaded the garden, offered his assistance. "My mother kept a garden like this," he explained as he helped her clear the worst of the weeds. "In Mexico, before we came north." Maeve welcomed both his help and his knowledge. "What would grow well here?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. The summer sun was intense, even in the early morning hours when she tended the garden. "Potatoes, carrots, onions," Hector listed. "Beans climb well on poles, tomatoes too, though they need protection from early frost." He grinned. "And chilies, of course. Food is too bland without them." With Hector's guidance, Maeve replanted the garden with seedlings he helped her purchase on their next trip to town. It was too late in the season for some crops, but she could at least establish herbs and hardy vegetables before winter. Charlie, true to his word, began teaching Maeve to ride. Penny proved to be the perfect mount for a beginner, patient and steady. At first, Maeve was terrified, clutching the saddle horn with white knuckles as Charlie led the mare around the corral. But gradually, she gained confidence. "You have good balance," Charlie observed during her third lesson. "Most city folks lean too far forward or back." "I think it's because I'm used to carrying heavy baskets of laundry," Maeve admitted. "You learn to center your weight." By the end of the second week, she was riding Penny without assistance, at least at a walk. The feeling of freedom was exhilarating. One evening, with Charlie's permission, she rode out to where Reid was checking fence lines. He looked up in surprise as she approached, his expression changing to one of approval. "Look at you," he called. "A natural horsewoman." Maeve laughed, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "Hardly that, but Penny makes it easy. Reid swung up onto his own horse, a tall black gelding named Shadow. Would you like to ride back together? There's something I'd like to show you. Curious, Maeve agreed. Reid led her on a route that took them along the creek, where wildflowers bloomed in profusion along the banks. It's beautiful, she murmured, breathing in the sweet scent of the blossoms. Wait until you see this, Reid replied, guiding Shadow around a bend in the creek. The landscape opened up to reveal a small, secluded meadow bordered by cottonwood trees. In the center, a clear pool had formed where the creek widened, its surface reflecting the late afternoon sky. This is my favorite spot on the ranch, Reid said, dismounting and helping Maeve down from Penny. My mother used to bring me here for picnics when I was a boy. They sat on a fallen log near the water, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek and the rustling of leaves overhead. Maeve felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if the beauty of this hidden place could wash away the hurt and uncertainty she had carried from Boston. Thank you for showing me this, she said softly. Reid glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dappled light. I haven't brought anyone here since my mother died. The simple statement carried weight, though Maeve wasn't entirely sure what it meant. Was he merely being friendly to his housekeeper, or was there something more in his decision to share this special place? As if sensing her confusion, Reid changed the subject. How are you finding ranch life so far? Is it very different from what you expected? In some ways, she admitted. It's harder physical work than I anticipated, but also more satisfying. There's a directness to life here, things need doing, so you do them, she smiled. In Boston, there were so many social complications, so many invisible rules about who could do what and when and how. Reid nodded thoughtfully. The West has fewer rules, though I suppose we have our own customs. But generally, people are judged more by what they do than by who their family is or how they speak. I find that refreshing, Maeve said, though I imagine it has its downsides too. It can be harsh, Reid acknowledged. Nature doesn't forgive mistakes out here. A wrong decision can cost lives during a blizzard or a drought. They talked until the sun began to set, sharing stories of their respective childhoods and the paths that had led them to this moment. Maeve found Reid easy to talk to. He listened intently and spoke thoughtfully, without the posturing she had often encountered in men. As they rode home in the gathering twilight, Maeve realized with a start that she was beginning to think of the ranch as home. The thought both excited and frightened her. Their arrangement was temporary, a trial for both of them. What if, at the end of the month, Reid decided she wasn't what he wanted after all? The third week brought changes. Reid announced at breakfast that he and the men would be moving a portion of the herd to a different pasture, which would keep them away from the ranch house overnight. Will you be all right here alone? He asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Of course, Maeve assured him, though the prospect of a night alone in the isolated house was somewhat daunting. I have plenty to keep me busy. Reid hesitated. There's a shotgun in my bedroom closet. Do you know how to use one? I've never fired a gun in my life, Maeve admitted. Then let me show you before we leave, just in case. He spent an hour teaching her the basics of loading and firing the shotgun, though he assured her it was unlikely she would need it. We haven't had trouble with bandits or wolves in these parts for years, he explained. But I'd feel better knowing you can protect yourself if necessary. The day passed quietly after the men departed. Maeve finished cleaning the upstairs rooms and began sorting through a trunk of linens she had discovered in a storage closet. Many were yellowed with age or damaged by moths, but some were salvageable with a good washing. As evening approached, she found herself listening intently to every creak and rustle of the house. Without Reid's solid presence, the place seemed larger and eerily quiet. She prepared a simple supper for herself, but found her appetite diminished by solitude. After eating, she decided to sit on the porch as she and Reid often did in the evenings. The familiar ritual might help calm her nerves. As darkness fell, she watched the stars appear one by one, trying to identify the constellations Reid had pointed out to her on previous nights. A noise from the direction of the barn caught her attention, a scraping sound, followed by a thud. Maeve tensed, straining her eyes to see through the darkness. It was probably nothing, a loose board or an animal, but her heart raced nonetheless. Another sound, this time clearly footsteps. Maeve rose quickly and retreated into the house, closing and latching the door behind her. She moved to the window, peering out cautiously. A figure was moving from the barn toward the house, a human figure, too large to be an animal. Maeve's throat tightened with fear. Should she get the shotgun? Would she even be able to use it if necessary? Before she could decide, the figure stepped into a patch of moonlight, revealing a familiar profile. Rebecca Hargrove. Surprise replaced fear. What was the banker's daughter doing at the ranch at this hour and with Reid away? Maeve hesitated only briefly before opening the door. "Miss Hargrove," she called. "Can I help you?" Rebecca started, clearly not expecting to be confronted. She recovered quickly, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance. "I came to speak with Reid. Is he here?" "I'm afraid not," Maeve replied, keeping her tone neutral despite her suspicion. "He and the men are moving cattle to the north pasture. They won't return until tomorrow." Rebecca's expression tightened. "I see. How inconvenient. May I ask how you got here?" Maeve inquired, noting the absence of a horse or wagon. "I had my driver leave me at the main road. I walked the rest of the way." Rebecca attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to surprise Reid. We have an understanding." The implication was clear, and it sent an unexpected pang through Maeve's chest. Did Reid and Rebecca have a relationship she wasn't aware of? He had seemed dismissive of the woman in town, but perhaps that was for Maeve's benefit. "I'm sorry you've had a wasted journey," Maeve said carefully. "Would you like some water before you walk back to the road? It's quite a distance." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Thank you." Inside the kitchen, Maeve poured water from the pitcher while Rebecca glanced around with poorly concealed curiosity. "You've been busy," she observed, noting the clean surfaces and organized shelves. "Playing house already." Maeve refused to rise to the bait. "I'm employed as Mr. McAlister's housekeeper. Cleaning is part of my duties." Rebecca sipped her water slowly, studying Maeve over the rim of the cup. "You know, Miss Sullivan, Reid may have taken you in out of pity, but he'll tire of the novelty soon enough. He needs a wife who understands society, who can help him advance beyond being just another rancher." "Mr. McAlister seems quite content with his position," Maeve replied evenly. "And our arrangement is purely professional." Rebecca's laugh was brittle. "For now, perhaps. But we both know what he's really looking for." She set down her cup with a sharp click. "I should warn you, Reid and I have known each other since childhood. Our families have always expected us to marry eventually. This detour with you is just that. Temporary." The words stung more than they should have. Maeve reminded herself that she had no claim on Reid beyond their business arrangement. If he and Rebecca had an understanding, that was his affair. "I'll be sure to tell Mr. McAlister you called," she said, moving toward the door in a clear indication that the conversation was over. Rebecca followed reluctantly. At the door, she paused. "You seem like a sensible woman, Miss Sullivan. Don't let yourself believe this is anything more than charity on Reid's part. You'll only be hurt in the end." After Rebecca departed, Maeve locked the door and leaned against it, her composure finally cracking. Were Rebecca's claims true? Did Reid and she have an understanding that predated Maeve's arrival? She had no right to feel betrayed, she reminded herself sternly. Reid had been clear about their arrangement, a month's trial as his housekeeper, with the possibility of something more permanent if they suited each other. He had never promised marriage or even courtship. Still, the thought of Reid with Rebecca elegant, slender Rebecca with her fashionable clothes and social connections, created an ache in Maeve's chest that she couldn't entirely dismiss. She slept poorly that night, her dreams troubled by images of Rebecca and Reid together, with Maeve always on the outside looking in. When dawn finally arrived, she rose with relief, determined to focus on her work rather than her confused emotions. Reid and the men returned mid-morning, dusty and tired from their night with the herd. Maeve had coffee and breakfast waiting, which they fell upon gratefully. "Everything all right here?" Reid asked between bites of eggs and bacon. Maeve hesitated, unsure whether to mention Rebecca's visit. "Fine," she said finally, "though Miss Hargrove came looking for you last evening." Reid paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Rebecca was here at the ranch." "Yes, she seemed disappointed to have missed you." Reid's expression darkened. "What did she want?" "She didn't say specifically." Maeve busied herself with pouring more coffee. "She mentioned that you and she have an understanding of some kind." Reid set down his fork with a sharp click. "Did she now?" It wasn't a question but a flat statement. "And what exactly did she say this understanding involved?" Maeve felt uncomfortable repeating Rebecca's insinuations. "She suggested that your families have always expected you to marry eventually." "That's what George Hargrove wants, certainly," Reid replied, his voice tight with anger. "He's been trying to get me to court Rebecca for years. Thinks combining his money with my land would make a powerful combination." He looked directly at Maeve. "But there is no understanding between Rebecca and me. Never has been." Relief washed over Maeve, followed immediately by embarrassment at how much it mattered to her. "I see." "Well, she seemed quite certain." "Rebecca Hargrove sees what she wants to see," Reid said grimly. "I'll have to speak with her and make my position clear." Again. The conversation was interrupted by Charlie, who needed Reid's input on a problem with one of the horses. As they left the kitchen, Maeve found herself analyzing Reid's reaction. He had seemed genuinely angry at Rebecca's presumption, which suggested he truly had no romantic interest in the banker's daughter. But did that mean he might have interest elsewhere? In her? Maeve pushed the thought away. She had come west as a mail-order bride, only to be rejected and then offered a position as a housekeeper. Romance had never been part of the equation. And yet, as the days passed, she found herself increasingly aware of his quiet strength, his kindness to his workers, the rare but wonderful sound of his laughter. He treated her with unfailing respect, seeking her opinion on household matters and listening attentively when she spoke. No man had ever valued her thoughts so clearly. The end of her trial month approached rapidly. Neither she nor Reid had mentioned it, though Maeve was acutely conscious of the passing days. Would he ask her to stay on as his housekeeper? Would he propose a more permanent arrangement? Or would he thank her politely for her service and send her on her way? On the evening of her 27th day at the ranch, Reid suggested they ride to the meadow by the creek after supper. "The fireflies come out at dusk," he explained. "It's quite a sight." They rode in companionable silence, Maeve now comfortable enough on horseback to enjoy the journey. The sun was setting as they reached the meadow, painting the sky in dramatic shades of orange and purple. They dismounted and allowed the horses to graze while they sat on the fallen log by the pool. As darkness began to gather, tiny points of light appeared among the trees, first one, then dozens, then hundreds of fireflies, their gentle glow creating a magical atmosphere. "It's like the stars have come down to earth," Maeve whispered, enchanted by the display. Reid's voice was soft in the gathering darkness. "My father proposed to my mother in this meadow, said he couldn't afford diamonds, but he could give her all the lights of heaven." Maeve's heart quickened at his words and the tone in which he spoke them. "That's beautiful, Maeve." Reid turned toward her, his face serious in the fading light. "Your month is almost up." "Yes," she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. "It is. I need to ask you something important." He took a deep breath. "These past weeks, having you at the ranch, it's been more than just having a good housekeeper. The place feels like a home again. You've brought light back into rooms that have been dark for too long." Maeve hardly dared breathe, afraid to hope for what his words might be leading to. "I know this isn't the most romantic way to go about things," Reid continued, taking her hand in his. "But I've never been one for flowery speeches. The plain truth is, I think we suit each other, you and I. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. And if you feel anything similar for me—" He paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you consider staying, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife?" Joy bloomed in Maeve's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Reid, are you certain?" "I'm not. I'm not what most men want in a wife." "You're exactly what I want," he said firmly. "I don't need a delicate ornament who can't handle ranch life. I need a partner, someone strong and capable who isn't afraid of hard work, someone I can talk to at the end of a long day." His hand tightened around hers. "Someone like you." Tears blurred Maeve's vision, but they were tears of happiness. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will stay and be your wife." Reid's smile was brilliant in the twilight. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "May I?" In answer, Maeve closed the distance between them. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, and Maeve felt as if she had finally found her place in the world. When they broke apart, both breathless, Reid rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. Maeve laughed softly. "So have I." They stayed in the meadow until the fireflies began to disperse, talking of their future together. Reid wanted a small wedding soon before winter set in. Maeve agreed there was no reason to wait when they both knew what they wanted. As they rode back to the ranch, side by side under the star-filled sky, Maeve marveled at the strange path that had led her here. Edward Chamberlain's rejection, which had seemed so devastating, had actually been the first step toward true happiness. "What are you smiling about?" Reid asked, noticing her expression in the moonlight. "I was just thinking," Maeve replied, "that sometimes being sent back is actually being sent forward to exactly where you're meant to be." Reid reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And you, Maeve Sullivan, are meant to be right here, with me." 3 days later, Reid and Maeve rode into Promise Creek together to make arrangements for their wedding. Their first stop was the church, where they spoke with Reverend Thomas about performing the ceremony. 2 weeks from Sunday would be ideal, Reid explained, before the first snow has a chance to arrive. The Reverend, a kindly older man with white hair and gentle eyes, smiled at them both. "I'd be honored to join you in matrimony, though I must say, this is rather sudden, isn't it? You've known each other, what, a month?" "Sometimes you just know," Reid said simply, his hand finding Maeve's. Reverend Thomas nodded. "Indeed. Well, I'll need to post the banns for the next 2 Sundays, and you'll need to secure a marriage license from the county clerk." Their next stop was Miller's General Store, where Maeve hoped to find fabric for a wedding dress. Mrs. Miller, the proprietor's wife, was delighted to assist. "A wedding? How wonderful!" she exclaimed, pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves. We don't have much in the way of white satin, I'm afraid, but this cream wool would make a lovely dress for an autumn wedding." Maeve ran her fingers over the soft material. "It's perfect," she agreed. While the women discussed patterns and trimmings, Reid wandered to another part of the store to purchase supplies. He returned as Maeve was completing her purchase to find her surrounded by several women from town, all offering congratulations and advice. "My goodness, Mr. McAlister," said one matron, "you've certainly kept this courtship quiet. None of us had any idea." Reid smiled diplomatically. "We preferred to keep our personal business private, Mrs. Johnson." "Well, I think it's terribly romantic," declared another woman. "A mail-order bride who finds love after rejection. It's like something from a novel." Maeve felt her cheeks warm at being the subject of such discussion, but Reid simply placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "If you'll excuse us, ladies, we have several more errands to complete today." As they stepped out onto the boardwalk, Reid grimaced. "I'm sorry about that small-town curiosity." "It's all right," Maeve assured him. "They mean well. Still, our business is our own." He guided her toward the county clerk's office. "Let's get that marriage license so they have something real to talk about." They were approaching the clerk's office when a familiar voice called out, "Reid, wait!" Rebecca Hargrove hurried toward them, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Is it true? You're marrying her?" She practically spat the last word, her gaze raking over Maeve dismissively. Reid's posture stiffened. "Miss Hargrove, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." "When would be a good time, Reid? After you've made the biggest mistake of your life." Rebecca's voice was rising, drawing attention from passers-by. "What are you thinking? She's a mail-order bride who wasn't even good enough for Edward Chamberlain." Maeve felt as if she'd been slapped. Before she could respond, Reid stepped slightly in front of her, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's enough, Rebecca. Miss Sullivan is to be my wife, and I won't have you speaking of her in that manner." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Your wife? She's your charity case, Reid. Everyone knows you took her in because you felt sorry for her. Don't confuse pity with love." Reid's jaw tightened. "You're embarrassing yourself, Rebecca, and you're wrong about my feelings for Maeve." "Am I?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Then why didn't you court her properly? Why this rushed wedding? Is she in trouble already?" "Is that it?" Maeve gasped at the implication, but Reid remained steady. "The only trouble here is your inability to accept that I've chosen someone else. I've never given you reason to believe we would marry, Rebecca. Any expectations in that regard were entirely your own." Rebecca's face contorted with anger. "You'll regret this, Reid McAlister. She'll never fit in here. She'll never be accepted." "That's where you're wrong," came a new voice. Mrs. Bennet from the hotel stepped forward, positioning herself beside Maeve. "Miss Sullivan has already been accepted by those of us whose opinions actually matter in this town." Several other townspeople had gathered, and to Maeve's surprise, many were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Bennet. "Miss Hargrove," said Reverend Thomas, who had emerged from his church upon hearing the commotion, "I believe it would be best if you returned home now. This public display is unseemly." Rebecca looked around at the unsympathetic faces and realized she had lost whatever support she might have hoped for. With a final glare at Maeve, she turned and stalked away. Mrs. Bennet patted Maeve's arm. "Don't you mind her, dear. She's always thought rather too highly of herself. We're delighted that Reid has found someone who appreciates him for who he is, not what his land is worth." Murmurs of agreement came from the small crowd that had gathered. Maeve felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected support from the community. "Thank you," she said softly. Reid's arm went around her shoulders. "Shall we continue to the clerk's office? I believe we have a wedding to plan." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. News of their engagement spread rapidly through the county, bringing visitors to the ranch, almost daily neighbors bringing gifts, women offering help with wedding preparations, men slapping Reid on the back in congratulation. Hector and Charlie were particularly pleased. "It is good," Hector said simply. "The ranch needs a mistress and the boss needs a wife." Charlie, usually so taciturn, surprised Maeve by carving a beautiful wooden box as a wedding gift, its lid inlaid with a pattern of stars. "For your treasures," he explained, presenting it to her shyly. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Reid and Maeve sat on the porch making plans for their future. They would continue to live in the ranch house, though Reid suggested some renovations for the spring. "We should enlarge the kitchen," he said one night, "and perhaps add a proper parlor for entertaining." "And a nursery," Maeve added softly. Eventually, Reid's eyes darkened with emotion. "Yes," he agreed, taking her hand. "A nursery." The thought of children, their children, filled Maeve with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Would she be a good mother? Would her children inherit her larger frame, and if so, would they face the same prejudices she had encountered? As if reading her thoughts, Reid said quietly, "Our children will be beautiful, Maeve, strong and capable like their mother." The day before the wedding, Charlie approached Maeve as she was gathering eggs from the now thriving chicken coop. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously. "A wedding present from Hector and me." Curious, Maeve followed him to the barn, where he led her to a stall she hadn't visited recently. Inside stood Penny, the mare who had taught her to ride. "She's yours now," Charlie announced. "We bought her from the boss last week." Maeve was speechless. Penny was a valuable animal worth far more than Charlie and Hector could easily afford. "But how?" "We've been saving," Charlie explained. "And the boss, he let us have her for less than she's worth, said it was a good cause." He patted the mare's neck. "She'll carry you many miles, Maeve. She's a good horse with a good heart." Tears welled in Maeve's eyes as she embraced first Penny, then Charlie. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure her always." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with a hint of frost silvering the grass. Maeve woke early, too excited to sleep. She had spent the night at Mrs. Bennett's hotel in town, following the tradition that the groom shouldn't see his bride on the wedding day until the ceremony. Mrs. Bennett herself helped Maeve dress, along with several other women from town who had appointed themselves honorary attendants. The cream wool dress, which Maeve had sewn herself with help from Mrs. Miller, fit perfectly, emphasizing her feminine curves while maintaining a modest propriety suitable for a church wedding. "You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Bennett declared, arranging Maeve's hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers from Mrs. Johnson's greenhouse. "Reid won't be able to take his eyes off you." At noon, the church bell began to ring, signaling that it was time. Maeve took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was the day she had once dreamed of being a bride, walking toward a man who valued and wanted her. The church was full when she arrived, the entire community having turned out for the event. As the organ began to play, Maeve stood at the back of the church, clutching a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. With no father to give her away, she had planned to walk alone, but to her surprise, Mr. Bennett, the hotel owner, appeared at her side. "Mrs. Bennett thought you might appreciate an escort," he said kindly, offering his arm. "If you don't mind an old man doing the honors." Grateful beyond words, Maeve placed her hand on his arm. "I would be honored, Mr. Bennett." The congregation stood as they began their procession down the aisle. Maeve saw familiar faces on both sides, townspeople who had initially viewed her with curiosity, but now smiled in genuine welcome. Hector and Charlie stood near the front, both uncharacteristically clean and dressed in their Sunday best, And at the altar, waiting beside Reverend Thomas, stood Reid. He had never looked more handsome, dressed in a new black suit with a crisp white shirt. But it was his expression that caught and held Maeve's attention, the look of wonder and love in his eyes as he watched her approach. In that moment, all her doubts and insecurities fell away. Reid was looking at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. Not despite her size, but including it, seeing and loving all of her, exactly as she was. When they reached the altar, Mr. Bennet placed her hand in Reid's with a formal gesture before stepping aside. Reid's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. Reverend Thomas smiled at them both before addressing the congregation. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company to join Reid McAlister and Maeve Sullivan in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other until death parted them. Reid's voice was steady and sure as he made his promises. Maeve's trembled slightly with emotion but grew stronger with each word. When it came time for the exchange of rings, Reid placed a simple gold band on Maeve's finger. "This was my mother's," he explained softly. "She would have wanted you to have it." Maeve, in turn, placed a plain gold ring on his finger purchased with money she had saved from her wages as his housekeeper. "With this ring I thee wed," she said, her heart full to bursting. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reid, you may kiss your bride." The congregation broke into applause as Reid drew Maeve into his arms for a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. McAlister, Maeve felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The celebration continued at the hotel, where Mrs. Bennet had arranged a wedding feast. The dining room was decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons, and tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by seemingly every household in the county. As they entered, someone began playing a fiddle, and soon Reid was leading Maeve in their first dance as husband and wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. McAlister?" he murmured against her ear. "Completely," she assured him, her heart too full for more elaborate declarations. The afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations, dancing, and feasting. Even Rebecca Hargrove made an appearance, offering a stiff but civil congratulation before departing early. Her absence was not particularly noted amid the general merriment. As the celebration wound down, Reid and Maeve prepared to depart for the ranch, their home. Hector and Charlie had ridden ahead to prepare the house, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night as husband and wife. They rode side by side in Reid's wagon, Maeve's new dress carefully protected by a blanket against the dust of the road. The sun was setting as they approached the ranch, painting the landscape in the golden hues that Maeve had come to love. "Look," Reid said softly, pointing toward the house. Maeve gasped in delight. The porch was decorated with lanterns, their warm glow creating a welcoming beacon in the gathering dusk. As they drew closer, she could see that someone, probably Charlie and Hector, had hung a garland of pine boughs and late-blooming flowers across the door. "Our home," Reid said, helping her down from the wagon. Before she could respond, he swept her into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying the bride across the threshold," he explained with a smile. Maeve tensed instinctively, aware of her weight. "Reid, you don't have to, I want to," he interrupted gently. "My wife deserves to be carried into her home properly." Without apparent effort, he lifted her and carried her up the porch steps and through the door. Inside, more surprises awaited: fresh flowers on the table, a fire crackling in the hearth, and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses set nearby. "Charlie and Hector?" Maeve asked as Reid set her carefully on her feet. "And half the women in town, I'd wager," Reid replied with a laugh. "Everyone wants to see us start our marriage right." He poured wine for both of them, then raised his glass. "To my wife, the woman who was rejected by a fool and found by a lucky man." Maeve touched her glass to his. "To my husband, the man who saw value where others saw only size." They sipped the wine, their eyes holding in the firelight. Then Reid set aside both glasses and drew her into his arms. "I love you, Maeve McAlister," he said softly. "Every inch of you, inside and out." "And I love you," she whispered back, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with passion as she responded. In that moment, all the hurt and rejection of the past fell away. Here, in the arms of a man who truly saw her, Maeve had found her place in the world. "Remember when you first arrived in Promise Creek?" Reid murmured against her lips. "When Chamberlain sent you back for being too big?" Maeve nodded, the memory no longer painful. Reid's eyes were intense in the firelight. "I knew then what I know with even more certainty now. You're perfect for me, Maeve. Absolutely perfect, exactly as you are." As he led her upstairs to begin their life together, Maeve silently thanked Edward Chamberlain for his rejection. It had led her here, to this man, this home, this love that embraced all of her without reservation. Being sent back had been the best thing that ever happened to her. 5 years later, Maeve stood on the porch of the McAlister ranch house, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. The house had changed in those years, expanded with the addition of 2 new bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and the promised parlor. The kitchen garden now thrived, producing vegetables and herbs in abundance, and the chicken coop housed 20 healthy hens. The ranch had prospered too. Reid had added 200 acres to their holdings and increased the herd substantially. They now employed 4 ranch hands instead of 2, though Hector and Charlie remained, having become like family. But the most significant changes were the sounds that now filled the once quiet house: children's laughter, running feet, occasional squabbles quickly resolved. 3-year-old Thomas, named for Reid's father, had his mother's auburn hair and sturdy build combined with his father's blue eyes. 1-year-old Eliza, named for Maeve's mother, was a quieter child, observant and thoughtful even at her young age. And now, Maeve's hand rested on her rounded belly where their 3rd child grew. Reid hoped for another daughter. Maeve suspected it might be twin boys, given how active the baby or babies seemed to be. "Mama," Thomas called, running onto the porch with something clutched in his small hands. "Look what Papa found." Maeve knelt carefully to examine his treasure, a perfect bird's nest, empty now that its occupants had fledged. "It's beautiful, Thomas. Where did Papa find it?" "In the big tree by the creek," Thomas explained, his eyes wide with excitement. "He said the baby birds grew up and flew away just like I'm growing up." "That's right," Maeve agreed, smoothing his unruly hair. "And you're growing so strong and smart." "Like you, Mama," Thomas declared with the simple confidence of childhood. "Papa says I'm strong like you." Warmth bloomed in Maeve's chest at her son's words. From the beginning, she and Reid had been determined that their children would never feel ashamed of their bodies, whatever size or shape they might be. Strength, health, and kindness were the values they emphasized, not appearance. "There are my favorite people," came Reid's voice as he climbed the porch steps, Eliza perched securely on his shoulders. Despite the gray beginning to thread through his hair at the temples, he was as handsome as ever to Maeve's eyes, and the love in his gaze when he looked at her had only deepened with the years. "Papa showed me the bird nest," Thomas announced, holding up his prize. "So I see," Reid said, swinging Eliza down into his arms. "And what do you think of it, Princess?" Eliza regarded the nest solemnly before pronouncing, "Pretty." "Just like your mama," Reid agreed, leaning over to kiss Maeve's cheek. "How are you feeling?" "Enormous," Maeve admitted with a laugh. "But well." Reid's free hand came to rest on her belly, his expression softening as he felt the baby move. "Not long now. Another month, according to Mrs. Johnson." The older woman had become the unofficial midwife of Promise Creek, having assisted at both Thomas's and Eliza's births. "Supper ready?" Reid asked, breathing in appreciatively. "Something smells delicious." "Beef stew and fresh bread," Maeve confirmed. "Clara set the table before she left." Clara Johnson, Mrs. Johnson's daughter, helped with the housework and children 3 days a week, allowing Maeve to focus on her garden and the business aspects of the ranch, which she had proven to have a talent for managing. Inside, they settled at the table, Reid at one end, Maeve at the other, with the children between them. After grace, they began passing dishes, helping Thomas with his portions while Eliza insisted on attempting to feed herself, with predictably messy results. "I rode out to the north pasture today," Reid said between bites. "The new calves are doing well, should fetch a good price at market next year." "And the irrigation project?" Maeve asked. They had been diverting water from the creek to expand their hay fields, a major investment for the ranch. "On schedule. Hector says we'll finish before the first snow." Reid smiled at Thomas, who was carefully copying his father's way of holding his fork. "Charlie found tracks by the upper creek, says there's a mountain lion up there. Should we be concerned?" "Not immediately. It's staying in the high country for now, but we'll keep the children close to the house until we're sure it's moved on." Their conversation continued in this vein, the comfortable exchange of partners who shared both work and life. After the meal, Reid insisted on clearing the table while Maeve took the children upstairs for their baths and bedtime stories. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Reid and Maeve sat on the porch in what had become their nightly ritual. 2 rocking chairs now stood where once there had been one, though in her current state, Maeve found the porch swing more comfortable. Reid joined her on the swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "About what?" "How different our lives might have been if Chamberlain hadn't rejected you that day." Maeve considered the question. "Sometimes, I might have married him and been miserable, always trying to make myself smaller to please him." She shuddered slightly at the thought. "Or I might have returned to Boston and struggled to survive there." Reid's arm tightened around her. "I can't imagine my life without you now, without Thomas and Eliza and this little one." His hand came to rest on her belly, where the baby kicked obligingly against his palm. "I thank God every day for leading me to you," Maeve said softly, "even if the path was more circuitous than I might have chosen." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the gentle motion of the swing soothing. The ranch was peaceful at night, with only the occasional lowing of cattle or the distant howl of a coyote to break the quiet. "I had a letter from Rebecca today," Reid said eventually. "She's engaged to a banker from Denver, seems quite pleased with herself." Rebecca Hargrove had left Promise Creek 3 years earlier, after her father sold the bank and moved to Denver for his health. Her departure had removed the last source of tension from Maeve's life in the community, where she had otherwise been fully accepted. "I hope she finds happiness," Maeve said sincerely. "Everyone deserves that." Reid turned to look at her, his expression tender in the moonlight. "You are the most forgiving woman I've ever known, after the things she said to you." "That was a long time ago," Maeve reminded him. "And look at all I have now that she doesn't, a loving husband, beautiful children, a home filled with joy." she smiled. "I'd say I came out ahead in the exchange." Reid laughed and kissed her temple. "Indeed you did, Mrs. McAlister. Indeed you did." As they prepared for bed that night, Maeve caught sight of herself in the mirror, her pregnant form silhouetted against the lamplight. Once, she had viewed her body with shame, constantly aware of how it failed to meet society's ideal. Now, she saw it differently, as strong, capable, life-giving. Reid had taught her to see herself through his eyes, and in doing so had helped her find a confidence she had never known in Boston. Reid came up behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his hands cradling her belly. "Beautiful," he murmured, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "So beautiful." "Even like this?" she asked, more from habit than real doubt. "Especially like this," he assured her, his voice deep with emotion. "Carrying our child, glowing with life. You've never been more beautiful to me, Maeve." She turned in his arms, her heart full of gratitude for this man who had changed her life with 4 simple words. "You're perfect for me." And as his lips met hers in a kiss that still held all the passion of their first days together, Maeve knew with absolute certainty that Edward Chamberlain's rejection had been the greatest blessing of her life. It had led her here, to Reid, to their children, to a love that embraced all of her without reservation or condition. Being too big had never felt so perfectly right.